No.
Nothing, no one's jumping out of this skin with any news. So let me just call up the slides I prepared just to show you here.
Paul, it's Peter. If I could jump out, I start a new job this week.
Oh, good. Well done, Peter. Well
Very
done.
good. So that looks all very good. The other thing I've been doing since we had this session with Craig Alexander, man, there's a massive amount of stuff on YouTube about this guy, obviously, and it's really worth watching some of those videos. If I've certainly taken the time. I watched about 20 of them, training sessions, races, interviews, in victory and in defeat, the interviews and the how do I say? This guy is just brilliant. You know, given interviews after one of his greatest defeats and so on. Brilliant. Yeah, really inspiring. Yeah, really
Well,
nice.
he's totally inspiring, and I mean, I know him
Yeah.
very well as both an athlete as well as a father and a husband, and now as a close friend. And you know, he is everything that you see on screen. I mean, just what he's done though is incredible, and I feel really privileged to have sort of got an inside view as to what makes someone like that really tick. You know?
Yes. No, 100%. I mean, I've only seen it from YouTube, and it would be another level knowing him directly. Yeah, so definitely.
So a prologue that I'll share with you guys is after the meeting, he reached out to Ian to get some IDs done for some coaches, and Ian, you know, to his credit, suggested that because Craig's ID was a guesstimate, and because it had seemed so on the money every time we worked, we just kept working with that. And he just never seemed to be in the right place to want to redo it. But after the call and everything, he did want to redo it. So I had him pegged as 7643, and he came up 7672. And whilst there's a lot of similarities between 7672 and 7643, there are also some significant differences for those of us who are really into ID. And given that this is the ID masterclass, and you're here because you care about getting those nuances, I thought I'd share with you, you know, some of the differences. And even Craig, I think the reason he was starting to he wanted to redo his ID was as he was learning more and more, both about ID, but also about himself, and about himself, you know, as a father and husband as much as an athlete. He felt that there were things about his ID that weren't quite right, and especially it was about the complete drive, because he felt that he was a little more structured and regimented than what his ID was sort of showing. And sure enough, not only is it the 7 incomplete, but for those of you who know ID, when the first 3 drives all go up, so, you know, up, 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 down, that's the ID of a perfectionist. And another word that I would use with that ID is it's all about mastery. Anyone who takes on, you know, with that ID, who takes something on, does it with the sense of mastery. I remember a friend of mine's husband not only learnt guitar and mastered guitar, but went and had a customized guitar built, like handmade for him, that would really, like, think of someone playing golf, they'd get handmade clubs that were exactly right for them. That's the level of sort of perfectionism that goes into that ID. And as we explored that, I just had lunch with Craig yesterday to talk it through. And I mean, it's just bang on for the way he approaches everything. So I thought I'd just share with you guys, for those of you who do have an interest in, you know, looking more into him and just studying him and getting motivated by what he's done. It's a real perfectionist ID, and it's very consistent with what I've found with elite athletes. I'd say more than 90% of the elite athletes I've worked with are probably the most common drive is avoid improvise, and strongly avoid improvise. But that sense of mastery and perfectionism is a trait that in some of the best athletes, it's well and truly there.
Hey, Paul, just another thing maybe to add on to what you got there is it's a confirmation that you can't guess IDs. And it's probably something that, you know, I often say to people, like in workshops, oh, this person, oh, they must be a this and that. And I think that's something comforting, you know, even to us, that here's you who've developed the thing, and there's still some stuff about ID that's sort of magic beyond all that to have a true score. So.
Well, and so just so you know, Mike, so that's exactly right, Richard. I mean, even I can't guess it on people I've even spent, significant time with. I'm still often confused as to what their drives might be. And I often get people saying to me, I suppose you're sitting there sussing me out, and I'm like, I don't even bother because I can't guess it anyway. But what I will tell you guys who are, aware of that is I only try and guess a couple of drives when I'm doing a searching call, helping someone find their drive. I don't try and find all drive. I just try and find something to give them direction, because what I found about the way instincts work is that if you point someone in the right direction, they will figure, their instincts are so powerful within us, they will figure the rest of the journey out. So I figure it's like saying to someone on a road, look, just head down that road and you'll find them. You don't need to tell them the exact address. They'll figure the rest out if you at least point them, is it like north, south, east or west? And so, but in time, part of him figuring it out was he was starting to realize, I think there's more to me than what this guesstimate is showing. And then he's then explored it. One of my fears is when people retake the ID and keep coming up searching, that's concerning to me, because it can be like a nail in a coffin, sort of belting them around. So I like people to get to a point where they're feeling a strong enough level of awareness that when they do it again, they're ready for it.
Hey, Paul, can I just ask a question? That your comments around, guessing IDs or trying to understand IDs, is the premise of that the fact that the onion skin, the various layers of onion skins brings various shades to a person's ID? Well, I'm just trying to understand why it is so difficult from one person to another to pick someone's ID.
Yeah, there's two reasons that come up. Number one, Grant, is exactly what you just said. The onion skins can really camouflage someone's drives. And the second reason is you don't know the degree to which someone is in stride or not.
Yep.
So someone could be, doing things that looks like they've got, a certain drive, and yet they could be really out of stride doing that. If I think about particularly completers, this comes up a lot for me, where they've got such a drive for harmony and keeping the peace. They'll often have that almost chameleon, like go with what the group's saying. And they almost look like they're doing it genuinely, because the genuine part is they're so wanting to keep the peace. So that part is genuine, but they might actually have enormous inner turmoil, when they're not able to do things the way their plan was designed. So that's just, true of every ID, really. I mean, there are elements of every ID that could do that, but one part's being in stride and the other is the onion skins.
Thank you.
All right, so let's just revert to the slides here. I just want to show you where we're at, just to remind you, next week, so what I do before we do these live interviews is I go and interview the people and just get them prepped and so on. So I also get into the zone of, what are the key elements that would make this a really insightful discussion. So Mark Kaplan and Angela Watts. So Angela is his marketing director. Mark runs just an absolutely first-class fitness center. It's the one I happen to go to, so I know it very well. I've worked with him and his wife. I've worked with all of their team. We've even done the ID in about 300 to 400 customers of the gym, so I've got a sense of the culture of the place as well. But I'll share more with you next week, but what he has done is just truly phenomenal. And I'm not as interested in the business elements as I am the mindset behind what he's done, but he's also done a great job with his director of marketing, who together has helped them build an incredible brand and culture. And that's what I'm looking forward to unpacking with all of you next week. So that's next week's interview. I can't believe how quickly that's come around. And then we just do a couple more, more public. So we've got the masterclass on December 9, the public webinar at December 16. And then we finish for basically, I don't know whether that's 4 or 5 weeks, probably 5 weeks, have a good break over the Christmas holiday break. And then we start up again, first up with a public webinar on January 2021. And then we go into the meeting, the interview, that I have with a guy called Treven Martinez. You might want to have a look at this guy. There's not as much material on him as there is on Craig Alexander, because Treven has done a brilliant job of flying under the radar and yet he's 3 years from now will be running $1 billion company. I mean, it is just, I'm talking $1 billion in revenue, not to mention capital value. What he has built is just extraordinary. I interviewed him on Tuesday, and oh my God, I'm so excited to do this interview and hear what because I'll tell you something, he's not a client of mine. At this point in time, he has not even done his ID. I just know the guy, and more the point, know of him, and I know his family, and I know how authentic and in stride he's been to do what he's done at 44 years of age. And he's just an extraordinary person. So he is doing his ID now. He told me he was going to do it yesterday, but I haven't checked, but at the moment I don't know what it is, if he has done it. But I've got my hunches to not talking about not guessing ID. There are some people that give you pretty obvious clues, and he gave me some significant clues there the other day, which shows just how self-aware he has been and how in stride he is. So that's going to be a great session as well to kick the year off at the end of January. So we've got some really, fun sessions coming up, and then we'll design the next chapter of sessions beyond that by the time we get there.
Hey, Paul, is it
Yes, Richard.
is it of value to send in questions ahead of next week?
Great.
Sort of
Great.
popped up for me already.
Well, I'm sure Angela will appreciate it. Mark is very good off the cuff. I printed out like my run sheet for Angela, and Mark looked at it and said, "So what's this for?" I'm like, well, that's probably what we're going to talk about, but I can't guarantee it will be. And Angela is like, because she's like, what is she, 7553? And she's like, oh, Paul, thank you so much. I've been so nervous about this. I'm nervous already, but no matter how much notice you try and give some people, it's still something that they get nervous about. So she's sort of freaking out about coming next week, but she's going to do it. And Mark said to me, you're the first person that's been able to get her on camera. I'm like, well, first time for everything. So yes, if you have any questions, send them in. These are great things to do. And I hope they introduce us to some people that haven't been a part of our world. But, what I look for, what I've decided to call the podcast series, and these will be turned into podcasts, is the Game Changer series. I'm looking for people who are game changing in what they've done, and by doing it in a way where they're very true to themselves. So they're like walking, talking, representation of what we all stand for, and their success hopefully is sort of, precedes them. So anyway, that's what I'm looking for. If anyone has any examples of people that they consider to be absolutely game changing and could be good to explore, I'd be very interested to hear from you. And as Richard said, any questions, you're very welcome to send them ahead of time.
Paul, I have a suggestion for game changers, and it's the unsung heroes that would not necessarily have $1 million company or have launched a product or whatever, but they've raised a single woman, raising children, having 2 jobs. The kids are decent and wonderful people. They're part of the community, and they wouldn't make the radar of a lot of magazines, but anyone who knows them is inspired by them because of the way they take their life and make it work for them. And they're able to milk some joy from what my wife calls the ecstasy of the mundane. They just take from life and make it work for them, but you wouldn't normally see them on a YouTube sort of thing. I'd like to include some people like that I know some, and I know we all do, and give them a little acknowledgement that they're actually holding the planet together.
That's exactly where I'm coming from, Greg. Like even someone like Treven, no one knows him. You'll hardly find any material online. He has built a great business, but to me, it was more the fact that virtually the first thing he said to me was, I love flying under the radar, and I look at it as an opportunity to give people, some visibility and some acknowledgement in a more public way from people who probably get them, because I think that for those types of people, to your point, Greg, I think it means more to them when they feel understood and valued for who they are, not so much of what they've accomplished, So yeah, great suggestion. Thank you. Okay, guys, let's just move to us being in stride today before we get into some of the questions. How are we doing on our peak performance indicator? I think everybody here pretty much knows this model of, our aim is to be on that green line there, in stride with who we are. On a scale of 0 to 10, for those of us who like numbers, we talk about being, 8s, 9s, or 10s, rather than down the bottom end of, 1s, 2s, and 3s. That can be incredibly demotivating. Has anyone got anything they want to share about, where they're at on that scale and maybe why they're there? Or want to reach out and get some support from the group if you're looking for strategies to get to a higher level?
I'll share, Paul. I'm on about an 8 or a 9. I had a really great day yesterday. One of my clients has been in a lot of disarray and we're looking for a new CEO, and the board was despairing of finding somebody really good. And we've got some really strong candidates and had some fabulous interviews yesterday. So I just feeling really good because I'm feeling able to be of value and of use to my clients. So, and I found during COVID, it's been really interesting. The more disconnected I've been from them, that's when my score comes down, or I'm out of stride. When I'm there being of value to my clients, which won't be any surprise, I'm really in stride and really on fire. So, yeah.
Well done. Good on you, Joe. Thank you. Anybody else?
All right, I got something. Not so much about me. I'm part of it, but I've been doing a lot of workshops with sessions with couples for a range of reasons. Some marriage in trouble, some marriage starting, some just looking at things. And I've noticed that in chatting with them with their IDs, the times when they try to act like that's not their ID, like the avoid verifier says, all right, I've got to get this figured out. I got it. Anytime they try to be their opposite ID, that's one of the signals they're off peak. And they are recognizing the symptoms, the signals that, oh my God, one of the ladies said, oh my God, I'm trying to be a verifier. No wonder I feel bad. And it went the other way too. And I'm noticing that the thing I'm helping them with their peak thing is basically get that early warning signal as soon as you can. And so you can have less to clean up later. And for couples, that's really beneficial because otherwise they're pouting around the house for a day, not looking at each other, and stuff like that. And that ability to own it through the ID has been really helpful. They go, I'm sorry, sweetheart, that authenticate wasn't very nice to you yesterday, was it? That kind of a thing. And they're giving him a language. But I've noticed with myself, when I try to not be my drive, because the world's expecting that, it's instant off peak, and it's time to go back to being me. So I've been noticing that a lot this last couple of weeks.
Hey, Greg, why would you, just using you as an example, why would you want to not be your ID? What is it that happens for you sometimes where you go, I need to, whatever not be your ID means? What's behind that?
A classic, a recent example was I'm sitting and listening to Vera on something and my mind's drifting and I'm going, she's trying to tell me this for something. And I wonder what's behind that. And I start going down my version of down authenticate. And I realized that all I'm doing is creating conspiracy theories and I've got nothing. And finally I realized, I go, listen, I'm lost here. I'm not sure what your question's behind your question. And I don't want to screw this up. So please fill me in. I just be the goose. I don't try to be a clever down green. I just be the goose that I don't bloody know and own that. And that was one that was really recent. I said, nah, it's too dark down here. I can't see shit. Please help me.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Anyone else got anything I want to share on their number, or particularly just get any help or guidance for given where you're at, given that this is what these webinars are all about, helping people stay in stride? We're good? Let's move on to some questions. So we have got questions from previous sessions, but we can take some more today as well if anyone has them. So working sort of backwards, from the bottom up, I should say, these are some of the questions that are just hanging over from previous weeks that we haven't yet resolved, and we don't have to do these if they're not still relevant to the people. But some of you on the call today might have other things more pressing, but I just thought I'd capture for you some of those that are still, you know, unfinished, as it were, and we can add to these today if there's anything on people's minds. So first of all, does anyone have anything on their mind that they'd particularly like to work through with the group today? I can always suggest some things, but so no one's got anything that's really pressing? Is there anything from this list that anyone would particularly like to explore?
Yeah, Leonie's suggested the fear of failure. You should be interested in finding out more of that.
Okay.
A couple of people come up with that one, Paul.
So before we talk about, thanks, Ian. Before we talk about fear of failure, can I just ask the group who on the call feels like they have a fear of failure? So we can just do a live test as to does it relate to particular IDs or not? Who would say that the fear of failure is very real for them and even a driver for them?
Paul, can I add to that? It's a question that came up actually on a program with an elite sportsman, and he had the question, not only more of a hate to fail, but also a love of winning. What is the playoff between the two? In other words, who are the people that really love winning versus hate failing? And it sounds a bit obvious, but I think there are different drives going for either the love of winning or hate to fail.
That's right, Doug. And in fact, even that sense of the competitiveness, when someone says I have a real competitive streak or I'm highly competitive, does that relate to certain drives more than others? I will just call out the nuance. I think there's a difference between fear of failure and hating to fail. You know, so I'm specifically calling out fear of failure. Who on this call would say that fear of failure is relevant for them? And I'm not. I've got you, Doug, on what you said about the winning piece too. Well, we can build that in as we go through it. So Annabelle, you're saying
sorry,
it's a driver for you?
Hi, Paul. Yes, very much so.
That's interesting. Okay. So Amanda,
I think it's a fear of failure. I might have the language wrong.
What? I missed what you said, Annabelle.
Sorry, I was just saying I think it's a fear, but I might have the language not quite right with you just saying hating failing, for example.
Okay, it'd be really interesting to hear from people with different IDs. I will tell you, on my experience, the bulk of people who have a fear of failure tend to have the verify and avoid improvise drive combination. That combination. So if I looked at this call, I'd be saying people like Ian, people like Doug, even you, Grant, you know, you might sort of say, yeah, that's a driver for me. Peter Kaiser, who else? Leonie, you know, I look at those ideas, Rona, I look at those ideas and go, okay, they're the people, because the sense of wanting to get things right all the time, whatever, you know, so there's that sense of if I don't get it right, I've failed. There's a right and wrong or a success failure sort of dichotomy in their head. And the fear element is associated with risk. So I can see why it makes sense that verify, avoid, improvise people have the fear of failure. And there are some people on the call that have specifically said, no, it's not true for me. And they're typically people who've got an opposite ID, like the stronger improvisers. That's why I thought it was really interesting that Annabelle, who's a 3-4-3-8, like a really strong improviser, so and avoid verify, so the opposite of what I'm saying, can still say, yeah, I think that's true for me. And and we can explore that, Annabelle, because as you said, maybe it's just the languaging and the semantics, you know, that are there. But to our earlier conversation around onion skins, what can happen when we're talking about ID with people, we've got to be really careful about generalizations, because there can be people sitting there with the opposite ID sort of getting confused, because I'll go, but I think that's me. And even if it's because of onion skin issues, the point is they can still then connect to what we're saying. And we've got to be careful that, is it the onion skin that's resonating with it, or is it the ID that's resonating with it? Otherwise, we can be really either cause confusion or can be, dismissive to people.
Yes, Paul, I think also the various IDs have an interpretation of how you say it. Like I've got an anathema about getting it wrong, I hate. Fear of failure, not too much, but getting it wrong really bugs me.
Great. That's good distinction, Doug. Thank you. Annabelle, as we explain that, does anything, did that sort of clarify anything for you? And would you say it's still true for you, or is it something different maybe?
Yeah, I think I fear getting it wrong. And I think failure to me is just a very negative emotion. I think it's the emotional side of things. And I'm not necessarily demotivated when I fail. I very much take action and try to resolve what's happened, but just very negative.
Great.
Yeah.
Oh, that totally resonates with your idea, because for someone, so first of all, the strong improvise driving you is the one that loves the positive energy. So anything that's deemed to be negative is going to suck the life out of you. But also when you look at your entire ID, down, 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 up, that is all about feelings and how people see you, So like the impression and the perception of how other people see you and the connecting with the people. So it's a very emotional ID, actually. Mike, I'd say the same for you. It's a very emotional ID. Emotion is what gets you going and what you thrive on. It's what really draws you to people, and equally it's what sort of pushes you away from people who are negative, meaning everything from critical and discouraging of you to people whose demeanor and tone of voice even is just a drain, something that's negative. But failure and how people might perceive you with failure is possibly a driver for you, in the sense of it's why you might then be driven more to want to succeed, as opposed to thinking of it as a fear of failing. It's like you want to go overboard on succeeding. Anyone have any other questions or comments around the fear of failure? I'd like to add to Doug's point about what about winning? What about the drive for winning and succeeding? Does that resonate with particular drives more than others? And I'll just call it and say, I don't have a clue on this one. I don't, with 30 years of experience doing ID, I haven't found a correlation to winning. I'm not saying there isn't one, but whereas the fear of failure has definitely stood out to me as the verify, avoid, improvise combo, I don't find it as clear for the concept of being having a hunger for winning and succeeding. I've just well, firstly, it hasn't stood out, and secondly, I just accept that every human being wants to succeed. That's what our peak performance indicator is all about. Everybody is naturally driven to have a sense of achievement and a sense of success. Winning denotes some level of, I guess, competition or comparison or something like that to someone, or maybe not. Maybe it's just a feeling of success in yourself. But I haven't found any correlation just yet. I don't know if anyone else has any comments that they've experienced, or even just about themselves, if they've got a real hunger for winning.
Well, if I could just say, oh, sorry.
No, you go.
Okay, Joe.
I was just going to say, if I'm in a situation where somebody, I've been given information, say it's an information session, and somebody says, oh, now we've got a competition about this, immediately I'm on high alert. So it's like, it's almost like that impact drive of mine just wants to come out and win. a competition. But if it's like a lottery or something that's a long drawn out thing, I'm like, oh yeah, it'd be nice. But if it's something that's mentioned in the moment and it's something that's happening right then and there, I'm right there. I'm full alert. If there's anything I can do to influence that, like answering questions or throwing my hand up quickly or something like that, but that's more of a part of a fun thing, but it's also part of that little bit of a competition and wanting to make that impact, I think. So that's where it really comes alive for me. Yeah. And it has done always.
Thanks, Jo. Thank you. Gail, I think you're going to share something.
Yes, I was going to say, winning's a funny word, because does it mean you come first in a race, or does it mean you succeed at what you're going to do? I just find that I have to be, the whole on show thing becomes important, but at a point, does it really matter? Because if I say, okay, I'm going to do this and I achieve it, for me, that's winning. So there's kind of the question is really hard, because I may never come first. I'm not a world champion. So if I go in for a 100-meter race, I ain't going to come first. But if I say I'm going to do 100 meters in, I don't know, however long it takes, different story. And that for me is the success. It would be great if I were a world champion, because that would really suit me. But sometimes you just have to go, hey, that's not me. Let's do this. So long as that's it, then I've got my positive energy and I'm fine and the world is dandy.
Thanks, Gail. Yeah, I think listening to you and observing what some people are putting in the chat, I think there's a different perception that or perspective according to the ID you have that gives you that drive to succeed / win. So, some people are talking about, like Amanda, you asked the question about the improvisers. Are they driven to win so that they can create a great impression? Yes, and impression / impact, / opportunity. If they can create a big opportunity for people, that might be look like that they're driven to win, but maybe what's underneath it are those other elements. And I saw Greg saying something to the effect of, if I can help people, then, or what I'm going to do is really useful and helpful, then yes, if that's what winning creates for me, then okay, then I'm driven to win. But where that's coming from is trying to be useful and helpful. It's not necessarily about ego, is the point I would make, And although there are people that can be egotistical, they're maybe not the people that are as self-aware and, authentic and as in stride as what we're talking about here today. So I can see where for the different drives for verify, authenticate, complete, and improvise, all 4 drives can have, a drive to win, but it's coming from a place that's connected to their drive.
Hey, Paul, I just actually, it was interesting when I heard sort of Gail talking as well. I also think that's a combination of the avoid, verify and the improvise, because it's not about ranking. Whereas I think you find the verify, improvise combination, it's more about the first, second, third, where did I come, what's the ranking? Whereas for Gail, the defining of the winning, it's the avoid, verify. It's like, it is what it is. So I think that's where some of the nuances and subtleties will come into it as well, the combinations.
Yeah, and Greg, you make the point in the chat about the youngin skins. I think that's exactly right. Like I'm well aware that particularly children, but people have got various levels of insecurity, and when people are chasing love, and one of our, think about the 6 human needs, one of them is to love and to be loved. And when people are desperately looking for love, meaning respect, acknowledgement, appreciation, love, they can do things, and if winning is going to get them that attention, then maybe they look like they're really hungry for the win, but it's coming from a different place, and maybe it's from one of those really deep-seated human needs, or maybe it's a need connected to their ID. You'd have to get to know the person to understand that.
Hey, Paul, it's Grant. I was actually grappling with that conversation the whole time, and it was Greg's comment that kind of unpacked it for me in my brain. I think for me, the onion skins absolutely has kind of changed the way I think about winning and losing, or winning and failing, however you want to describe it. As I was growing up, I struggled a lot with self-confidence, and I definitely had a fear of failure in like sports, at school, etc., to the point where I'd lose sleep over it. And then I think over time, as I've learnt things like instinctive drive, so what drives me, but also delved into what does failure mean for different people, and the likes of Michael Jordan and co. So for me, I've learnt to mentally even strive for failure, look for failure, because failure can then lead you to greater success. So, and how I rationalize it is, for me, it's all about being at my best. It's like winning for me is being at my best. Simple.
Yep. Thanks, Grant. That's cool. Good that you take something that was a negative at some point, something that was like a handbrake in your life, and that hasn't changed, but because of the way you see it changing, that's now become a tool that you use rather than, get thwarted by.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paul. I had a conversation yesterday with a guy who is in a team, and the lady who's high verified believes that this guy Luke is also verified, but is actually a 4. Sorry, thinks he's verified, but he's actually a 4 in verify. And we came to the conclusion that he doesn't want to make it perfect. He wants to make an impact. Now, he's 8 in improvise, and he's represented Australia in cricket and Western Australia in cricket. And also his drive to win was so paramount. And the questions we reckon that the reason he was asking the questions was purely to be able to make an impact and get it right the first time. I found it a really interesting conversation. I'd appreciate any feedback on that.
Well, the first thing that stands out to me is that'd be a very interesting story for someone who's made it to that level of success as an athlete, who's an 8 in improvise. That'd be a great story there around how is someone like that maintain the focus to go through the rigorous, monotonous training sessions and drills that you do to get to be that good at something. That would be a really impressive story to unpack, Mike. That's the first thing that stands out to me.
Do we know his Authenticate drive?
He's a use Authenticate, Gail. He's down,
Yeah.
up, down, up.
6 in, yeah.
That's what I thought. That's what I see in all the people that I know who are sports, who are really elite athletes, and I know a large number, and who are into fitness and who are world champions in things. And that's where I always see it, that Authenticate drive, and somehow they've managed to build the other things around it.
Interesting. Yeah, that's good.
No other comments on these? Jay, you asked an interesting question earlier today. You said, has anyone had any experience in relation to ID and mental illness? I think it's a very, current topic, mental illness and mental well-being, mental wellness, particularly with all the change, all the stresses going on around the world and the changes to workplace and family dynamics and so on. I think this is I'm finding it coming up a lot in our coaching conversations. It would be very interesting. I don't know if anyone has something else more important to talk about, but if there isn't, I think this could be an interesting topic to unpack, and maybe even beyond today. I don't know that this is enough time to really give it the attention that it deserves, but this is a huge area, and in case it's relevant to even people on our call, it certainly will be relevant to people within our circles for sure. Now, knowing the stats that I do, it might be worth spending a little bit of time on this if anyone has anything particularly on their mind or would like to understand. Joe, did you maybe want to kick off, what's behind your question?
Oh, I guess it was more just, I understand from the graphic you showed us at the beginning, and the more you pull down the stride, the more unwell you become. But, I'm really interested in this whether your experience and other people's experiences who use ID a lot across a lot of people when you're doing these group sessions and things, whether you see the pattern and look, I get it on the surface. I get it on the surface level, but I'm absolutely, the people who really love being with others and you're talking about feelings and emotions are really important, and they're feeling a bit squashed at the moment because they can't express those, or they're expressing them in a different way. And I guess I was just wondering if there's any information around how helping people understand their ID would help them come back on track. And really it was more just to start the conversation. Because as you say, Paul, I think it's a massive area. Maybe this is something that we could look at or start looking at more consciously and in consideration and in interaction with our team members, and look at using that as a way to help people get back on track more quickly, or what. So it was more just a conversation opener.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was speaking to somebody yesterday, and their daughter is a 70 in Verify. And she was like, Dad, I need counselling because I've got issues, and it really scared the dad, because he's like, shit, at this age, like, kids have got options that we didn't sort of think about, back when we were that age. And she's saying, I've got issues. Like, I think there's things wrong with me. And yet I look at through the lens of ID and go, as a 70 in Verify, she'll have issues for the rest of her life type thing, in terms of, that's how her mind thinks, that there's issues. If she doesn't have issues, she doesn't have problems to solve. And that's what actually drives her. There's nothing wrong, but because she's lacking some self-awareness, it's very easy to feel like things are wrong. And when she compares herself and gets the benefit, or that's not the right word to use, but the influence of social media, I can see her going to a counsellor having a checklist of things, ticking boxes, and then saying, yes, actually, I can see that you've got, there's concern, I don't know, whatever label they'd want to give, but, most people look at, if you tick enough boxes, you get prescribed a particular label, whatever that is. And we would look at it through the lens of ID and go, no, I mean, she's just a verifier who's asking lots of questions about herself. Nothing's wrong. They're just a lot of questions. And if she's given some good answers, she can be really, on a very successful and productive path for her life. I watch people who are particularly improvisers getting labeled as having depression and I think it's an ID that's really vulnerable to that label. But whether or not it's depression, or whether it's just, because they will often say, I feel depressed. So people go, oh my God, depression. They hear depression. But what they mean is, because it's the emotional drive and they're really feeling down, then it's easy for people to jump to that conclusion when really they're just looking for some positive energy to get them back to a really good place. So mental illness for me, I'm not saying there isn't such a thing as mental illness and chemical imbalances in people's lives that can, and bodies and minds that can cause all of that. But I think there's a lot of people where the ID can really help them explain a lot of what's missing, and by helping them meet their needs, to get back to a place of really good wellness and sustainable wellness.
Paul, it's Gail. I'd just like to throw in, and I don't know if Mike identifies with this as well, but before I did the ID, I can't say I didn't have self-confidence, but I was so different to everyone else that I never felt I fitted. And I always felt, oh God, what's wrong with me? And I was always thinking, oh, this isn't right. Why can't I do this? Why aren't I doing that? Once I did the ID and I realized who I was and that it was just me, it all evaporated. And so from my perspective, I don't think I was quite at mental illness. And yes, that's right. If things aren't going quite right, you might flow into a room and go, oh God, I'm depressed. But you don't really mean it because you're saying it, well, I don't, with a flourish and a aplomb. It's, you know, it's just sort of saying, oh, it's not going right today and it'll get better in 2 seconds. But I do think that it can so easily be misconstrued. And I got an email the other day from someone, a school friend that I hadn't met for years and years and years and years and years. And it was headed up, RUR Gail Freeman, because they were trying to get together with everyone who was in my class at school many, many years ago. The point I'm making is I felt I didn't fit in. If they call me R. Gail Freeman at this age, obviously I did fit in, and my eccentricities were just tolerated, shall I say. And so what I was thinking was a major drama and I wasn't right. It was actually fine.
You're definitely our Gail Freeman. No, that's really good, Gail. I've had many people say that to me, that they lack the confidence because whether they were improvisers or whether they just felt really different to whatever their group or even their family was. You know, people talk about being the black sheep in the family or the odd one out. And you can imagine for a completer, especially, the last thing they want is to feel like they're the exception. They want to feel like they fit in and they belong. And so there are all sorts of insecurities that a completer might feel when they're the one that's really different in their family. And that can give rise to what looks like mentally related, maybe illness, if not mental issues. But a lot of it is just, you can see the connection through ID. I think it's really sad for me when I'm just thinking of a family at the moment where there's a person who's like, they're very entrepreneurial, the whole family, and there's one person who isn't, and they're the completer, and they so want to fit in. They're doing things and behaving in ways that are much more like the rest of the family, but it's not, it doesn't look to me like it's true. And I'm torn between, are they onion skin layers that person's learnt and, you know, now it's become their new normal because normal is a driver for a completer, or are they like the duck that's, you know, looking very calm on the surface, underneath everything sort of, you know, all in turmoil? One of the things I do is I look for the health symptoms that I typically see, which normally skin is a great example. And, you know, if I saw someone like that suffering from eczema, then, or, you know, some psoriasis, something like that, I'd sort of go, okay, so maybe something's amiss that they're not even that conscious of. And it might be one of those things like what Gail's saying, maybe years down the track, you know, some light bulbs appear where they go, oh, now I can see the difference. But even they can be convinced that everything's okay right now. But the skin, you know, our subconscious is so strong, it can still show up somewhere.
Oh, God, yeah. Absolutely.
So when we think we're in stride, if we truly are in stride, our body will represent that in terms of its health and its energy. And that, to me, for those of us who are into the masterclass side of ID, that's a great way to test yourself. And so, you know, you might have absorbed certain definitions that you felt were okay so that you fitted into your family or were successful or were able to sustain success in a role so you could provide for your family, whatever the driver might be. But if there's a health trade-off, then there's still some room to go there, you know, in terms of how you adjust to get even more in stride.
Paul, I just go back to the early 90s when I first did my ID, and I came up searching. So I just in response to Gail's comment, and I think looking back on that, I was trying to be all things to all people. And and when I did the ID, then it came up with the 9 in improvise and resistant on the others. And I just look back to that, and I think that was the big issue for me then.
Got it. I can see that. Greg, you made an interesting point too in the chat about depression and the improvised drive. You know, because whilst I say I see a lot of people who are improvisers, I think getting falsely labeled with depression and looking like they have an erratic emotional sort of line. I've definitely am aware of avoid improvised people who have suffered from depression. And I learn a lot. Actually, Vicky, I think it was you that called it out in one of our webinars months ago now about the pressure that builds up with avoid improvisers, where they absorb everyone else's pressure. So I can see that there can be an effect on avoid improvisers where they've just absorbed so much pressure. And I think an area that I can almost feel myself being drawn towards is this whole area of PTSD, because it's if you think about the people that are typically the ones we first were aware of, maybe I'm uneducated on this, but for me it was the military, and now we have a lot of our frontline workers. And having done the IDs of military people and having done the IDs of many medical people, they are, like 90% plus avoid improvise. And there's a lot of them that have just absorbed pressure over a long period of time, and it's taken a toll. And I can see where it would even take its toll at a chemical level in a person. But that doesn't mean the solution are other chemicals. Maybe that's a way to help, turn something around, but a sustainable long-term path would be getting back in stride with who you are and your ID. And I think there'd be a great role for us to play helping people en masse. And if anyone's got any connections or passion in that sort of space, I think it would be a great area to explore further. Especially off the back of COVID, where so many frontline workers, where there's been a great empathy that's developed in the community for frontline workers. And that I would just say includes the military, but that's like an exponentially growing number of people that are suffering from that particular issue. And I think we could do a lot to help it and maybe even help prevent it if there were, mechanisms along the way that people could release that pressure. I even heard about a show on television, the SAS show, and some of the things they were doing for a television show, and over even just a few weeks of filming, the stuff they were putting people through, I looked at that and thought that's PTSD stuff. That could be irreparably damaging to people, depending on their makeup, and yet I'm sure those people get released from their contract and sent on their way, and there's no support structure necessarily to help make sure they're okay. Okay, any other questions or comments anyone has around mental illness? Anything they want to know about for themselves or someone in their family or inner circle?
All of you ever, we've talked about this before about going to Beyond Blue. I just said in the chat and doing some IDs and see if there's any pattern. And I think maybe Ian just said it. We might have concluded probably all come up searching, but we don't know that. And have you ever done anything about that? And I just don't know about it. Like go to some place where depression's already being acknowledged, and then see if we can get their IDs and see what drives do, or if there is, or it turns out it's more onion skins than drive. That's the curiosity.
Well, I haven't. Off my memory, Greg, the one group I remember working with, just for the sake of everyone here knowing, was in Victoria, and it's probably 20-something years ago now. There was a group we worked with. I'm going to say it was called Job 100, but it was for people that had been long-term unemployed, and we did the IDs on about, from memory, 200 people. It was a large number of people, and they would then put through a series of support conversations to help them get a job. And those people who did the ID and got support linked to their ID, I remember the results being significantly better than those that didn't get any help, but just remained like, I think virtually everybody that did their ID got a job, and those that didn't were still sort of floundering. It was a massive difference. I don't remember the full detail, but that wasn't about mental illness. That was about helping them get their act back together to get back in stride and get, fully employed again. I would be very supportive of any type of research in like what you said about with Beyond Blue, if anyone has any connections or has a desire to lead that, I would happily sponsor, whatever IDs people wanted to do to make an impact in that space. Is there anyone that does have that connection or that desire to, connect with Beyond Blue or a similar organization and look to do something along those lines?
Paul, it's Gail. I know the CEO. She was a client of mine when she was in Canberra and also a board member of Beyond Blue. And so I'm not in a position at the moment to follow it through myself, but I may be in the position to facilitate some introductions if that's of any value.
Okay.
Well, I'd be really interested in that. I mean, it's something that I've sort of had some work with in my long distant past, but it's certainly very prevalent, and it's certainly something that concerns me moving forward. And so, any useful tools, I'd be really happy to be part of that or to do what I can in that. So yeah.
Thanks, Joe. Well, if you guys want to take it forward, if you for example, Joe, if you want to connect with Gail, get the contact, get in there. I just want you to know I would happily sponsor. Yeah. If someone said, "Can we do a bunch of IDs on 200 people or something?" It would take me a nanosecond to approve that. I think it's something that would be really good for that community, and it would be great visibility for us from a brand point of view to do something significant in the mental wellness space.
Cool.
Okay, well, no one else have any? So there you go. Thanks, Gail. Oh, Joe, sorry. Thanks, Joe. All right, so it doesn't sound like anyone sort of chomping at the bit, wanting to do it, or where it's timely of something else they've got on. But if you do and you'd rather talk offline, please let me know. And it's good to know who's got some connections so that if we have something pop up that we can instigate, some research in that space, we know who to maybe, who's got some interest themselves.
Yeah, Paul, I'll have a look at that PTSD side. I know a couple of the military guys who are developing things on that, but can't promise, but let me look.
Okay. Thanks, Doug. All right, guys, well, I think we're very close to the end of the hour. Is there anything that anyone wants to cover before we wrap for today? Right, well, thanks for being on the call and a good discussion. It's good to delve into some of the nuances and deeper elements of ID than what we normally do in the more public webinars. So thanks for your questions and your perspectives as well. I think everyone loves hearing from each other and seeing just the nuances that play out with each of the different drives. Thanks again and have a great day. We'll hopefully see you all again next week. It'll be a really great live interview session. Take care, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
Paul. See you guys.
Thank you. Bye.